This is a picture of Mr. J.B., who was quite an impressive presence. He's in his car here, and he had a driver named Haynes, and he's taking his wife and Haynes and a friend on a trip. And there's a great story about that I can quote directly here. Mr. J.B. was very sharp. Because he'd lost his vision, his other senses were heightened. And in those days, the roads were not, many of them paved, and they might have been, you know, clamshells or gravel or mud or dust or something or other, and he kind of had an idea what was what. So according to this article written by my Uncle Clarence, there's a story by Mr. Murray, who was one of the very important foremen of the company. And they were going over to East Greenwich to examine some wood that purchased for the boat building. And after a while, driving over, Murray heard Mr. J.B. Herreshoff call out. He said, "Haynes, you fool, you're taking us down to Warwick Point again instead of East Greenwich." So Haynes said, "Oh, no, sir, I'm on the right road to East Greenwich." So Mr. Murray said that J.B. Herreshoff got out his watch and he said, "Well, you wait. In 3 minutes, we'll be passing Senator Aldrich's home, and Haynes will have to turn around and go back." And that's exactly what happened. The man was definitely leading the way. There's also a story about how he estimated on the boats. He did all the estimating, even though he was blind. And the way it was, he would have explained to him the proportions of the boat and the materials and everything, and how long it was. And he knew more or less the girth around the hull. And he knew that if you multiplied the girth by the length times the constant 0.7, you'd get the area of the hull. And he knew the cost of steel plate, and he knew the cost of the frames and all of that. So the story is that one time he was down in Washington with the Navy Department, and they asked him, after going all over the specifications, if he could get back to them in a month or so with a quote on this vessel. He said, "Oh, no, that's not necessary." He said, "If you'll give me a quiet room after lunch, I'll give you the estimate this afternoon." So they did that. They put him in a quiet room, no computers, no telephones, no teletype, no secretary, just Mr. J.B. running over all these figures in his mind. And he had a very good method. He figured all the materials and added them up in his head. He estimated what the labor would be and what he'd have to pay them, and he added that to it. And he came up with a number. And then he multiplied it by 2, and he told the Navy that was the price. And they bought it. So that's sort of the way he did business, very direct and simple. This is my late father, A. Sidney Herreshoff, who was very, very popular in the company, particularly with the men, because he was always so straightforward, and they thought he was very smart, which he was. He was underappreciated because he worked in the shadow of his famous father, Captain Nat Herreshoff. But the fact is, I have my models on loan up here, some 500 models, and quite a few of those design models were made by Sid Herreshoff. One was made by Francis Herreshoff, and a great many were made by Sid. And so he deserves more credit than he got, but he never seemed to mind. And he was so good a team worker with his father. This was my dad's earliest launch, named the Bubble. It was a 26-foot launch. Very important to me because he used this launch to court his future wife, Rebecca Chase, who lived on Prudence Island. So I'm very glad Dad had a fast launch. And this launch was really quite much appreciated around town, but it was during the days of Prohibition. And one time, after he'd been over to see my mother in Prudence, he was coming back, and the boat was pretty fast. And he didn't realize it, but he was being chased by the revenue agents in their boat. And since he didn't hear them, they fired a shot over his head. And then he did stop. And his father, Nat Herreshoff, was very indignant about that they would do such a thing. This is my father and mother. This is an aquaplane. Oops, a minute, wrong button. This is an aquaplane, which, much like a surfboard, has a line on it which goes to the towboat, the bubble. And this is my dad on the board, looking pretty relaxed, and my mother standing on his shoulders. Now, I used to do this aquaplaning, and I never could hoist a girl up on top, but my mother was amazing at it. I asked her one time, what was it like to fall off that? And she said, oh no, I never fell off. And I got tired of it, I just dove off. And I also remember when she was about 90 years old, showing guests around the other room there. We have this picture. I overheard her one time saying, and I can still do that, but I don't have time. I never said anything. We dedicated the library upstairs to my mother. It's here in the portrait in the middle there. And this is my nephew, Halsey Herreshoff II, who is either here or coming here, my brother Nathanael Greene Herreshoff III, and myself, when we dedicated that library about 20 years ago, something like that. My father also built automobiles, and this is an automobile called the Naval. And my business partner, Adam Langerman, and I were talking about this car today, and we'd like to build a replica of it. And Steve, maybe this could be a car that even you would admire, because you have a lot of Ferraris and Alfa Romeos and all, but Adam and I are going to build the Naval. It was a quite interesting car. The body was made like a boat with steam bent frames and mahogany planking and varnish. So all this dark color was actually varnished mahogany. And you see it was a pretty sporty car, wire wheels. And we don't know a whole lot about it, but who knows, maybe in the 4th of July parade, on the 100th anniversary of the Naval car, we will be driving a replica in 2016 in the 4th of July parade. That's what I'd like to see us do.
What was the motive power?
What, beg pardon?
What was it driven by?
Well, it was an early gasoline engine, the details of which we must now research. Hopefully there's some drawings of this in MIT. And by the way, the designs here entailed many, many drawings. There were 17,000 drawings. And those are all under the care of the museum at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. But we have access to them all, and so I think what I'll do is go up there sometime soon and see if I can find the drawings of the Naval. This is the famous yacht Gloriana that more than any brought Captain Nat to the forefront, that won the races in the 46-foot class. And you can see she's got a great looking rig, a lot of stability, and she was way, way better than all the boats that she competed against. And this is another picture of the great schooner Westwood, the final command of Captain Charlie Barr in 1910. This boat went to Europe and won a great many races in England and Germany. And as a matter of fact, because of the success of the Herreshoff schooners, the Kaiser in Germany, who was plotting the beginning of World War I, contacted the Herreshoffs and said he'd like a schooner that could beat the Westwood. So Captain Nat, as he often did, made a very small sketch with some of the proportions and the length and beam and draft and sail area and so forth, and sent it over to the Kaiser. And the Kaiser wrote back and said that exact boat wouldn't really work for him because his harbor wasn't deep enough to accommodate the draft of the boat. Well, this led to action by two stubborn Germans. My grandfather wasn't about to change the design because he wanted it to be fast and good, so he wired back to the Kaiser, I recommend you dredge out your harbor. So he never did get that job. This is the way the shops looked here. We don't have a lot of pictures like this, but I very much treasure this one. Not only because you see it indicates the fact that even fairly large sailboats were built upside down. This is actually the boat that I have today, the New York 40 Ragosa, which is at a mooring just offshore here. It's the boat with the two large wooden masts. And this is a sister ship, the Merrily, which is also very well restored and is sailing in Maine. And beyond it is a schooner named Mary Rose, which is also restored and won some races this spring in the spring regatta at Antigua, and the boat is in Antigua. Well, we do have a few pictures of how they built things, and one of the important boats, which was the forerunner of one of the boats we celebrate tonight, was the Illyrian. And this is a picture of the workmen there, and they're lined up the way they were. See, there's a guy painting, and the guys in the foreground built the boat. And I now build Illyrian boats, a little smaller, but from the same hull design. So we took a picture one time of our workers, including myself and my nephew there. And we've also got a guy up on the deck there painting, Tony Arruda. And this is an example of the great yachts they built. This is Fred Bissett's Corsair, which was a tender for the second J.P. Morgan's large vessel, the Corsair. And this has been very well restored, and Fred uses it every summer. You see the nice mahogany work in the forward cockpit of it, typical of the things they did. And most of the yachts that were built here had tenders like this. And we have some good examples of those upstairs here and all. Some of them untouched over 100 years and some restored. And they had just a few men who spent all their time building these tenders amazingly quickly. See, they're lap straight, they have tiny steam bent oak frames, and they're very light and very, very easy to row. Well, I took this picture, somebody took this picture of me this morning because I was going around to look at some of the things they did. This is an example of the hollow bow of these boats, and this is on a boat named Sadie, which is also involved in the evolution of the Newport 29 class. And one of the points to be made in these next illustrations is the fact that everything used was made here. There was no need to use a telephone or anything, or UPS or other deliveries, because they had their own foundry, they had their own machine shop. Captain Nat didn't really like the bolts that he could buy, so he designed bolts with finer thread, and they made those as well. And those, curiously enough, are very much the same proportion as the bolts used in modern airplanes and high-grade items that are built with great precision.